Here we go. Welcome along to a new episode of Irreverend, the only show, as far as I'm aware, where clergy in the Church of England take a politically unorthodox line on the events of the day, or at least I think that's our USP anyway. And today we have back once again the inimitable, and something else, the Reverend TJ Pelham. How are you doing, TJ, today?
Okay, yeah, I'm all right, thanks, Jamie. I've been rediscovering my teenage self these last few days. I found, well, my parents found a big box of Warhammer models in the loft, which I put away when I was about 15, and they're really badly painted, and I've been really enjoying just painting them and sort of observing the models and having a really sort of close time doing that. So that's been keeping me sane for the last couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
I have lots of fake grass to glue onto the bottom, and it looks really good, even if I'm saying so myself.
Wow.
So that's good. And also, do you know what, Jamie? I think there are loads of clergy who would claim to be prophetic, but actually...
pathetic, did you say, or prophetic?
But actually sort of parrot, and I'm not making any claim to prophecy here because I'm not that bold.
Yeah.
But who sort of actually comes down to it, sort of parrot the political sort of assumptions of the age back into that sort of echo chamber over and over again. And I like to think we don't do that. We don't make any claims to being prophetic, but nor do we sort of make the assumption, I think that's wrong, that sort of basically The Guardian is a prophetic book. Which you get far too much in clergy circles, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, Tom. I think that in order for something to be prophetic, it has to at the very least, as a kind of necessary condition, be a minority view. I don't think it can be something that everybody basically already thinks. I think that's a bad mistake. But that's a good observation to start with. Just before I introduce our very special guest today, I did get an email from a chap called Harry, who commends us, Tom, on our show of last week. But he says that we do a lot of beard stroking and asks us if we're aware of this. And he says the non-hirsute Daniel provides another dimension to the show. Are you aware of your beard stroking, or even mine?
I'm not aware of yours, Jamie. Not really aware of mine either. If you've got a beard, it's there basically to be stroked. Is my actual observation. If you haven't ever grown a beard, was it Harry?
Harry, yeah.
Then try it, and then you can stroke it and see how it feels. It's a bit like having a pipe, sort of aid to thinking. I think. Anyway, do you know what, Jamie? I'm thinking of having mine sheared off. In celebration of the 12th of April, when a few of our freedoms are graciously returned to us, I'm going to go to a barber's and ask for a hot towel shave, because I only do this about once every 6 years.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have it all off, and then I'm going to discover that I'm way too lazy to maintain it, and it will go back again by the end of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, what you should do, Tom, is what you did on that special night at Cuddesdon, where you shaved off all your facial hair except for your moustache, and you looked quite a lot like John Cleese. I mean, that was excellent. In fact, that would be great, and on the podcast we could see it as well. So I don't know. Could you do that?
I'm not allowed moustaches, Jamie. I look too weird.
Okay. No, you look great.
I think they look sort of swashbuckling, but my wife vehemently disagrees.
There's a Facebook page called Bearded Gospel Men, which has got lots of pictures of sort of historical pictures and current pictures of, preachers and people who have got very big beards. Perhaps that would be something to aspire to. I've never had one myself, so.
Well, we're gonna have to find this colour.
Surely we deserve a page on it, Jamie.
Well, I would have thought so. I mean, it depends how big the podcast gets, doesn't it? But,
actually, anyone who lives in Winchester, and if you can go to the cathedral, there's a wonderful carving in the choir screen there of someone who looks identical to Jamie, but with a slightly bigger beard. It's one of the.
Oh, that wasn't in the choir stall, Tom. That was on the outside of one of the chantry chapels. I think it was Bishop Fox's chantry chapel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a stone carving.
This is the fitting image of Jamie.
Well,
there's another a bearded cleric. I've always liked Cramner's beard. I've always wanted a beard like that. But again, unfortunately, it doesn't pass the wife test.
Yeah. I shaved all my beard off once except for a moustache, and my wife said that I looked like a World War One fighter pilot, which, to be fair, I did. But anyway, let's stop this now, Tom, and introduce our very special guest. So we were talking about his article last week, and we thought, why not just invite him to come on the show and have a conversation with us about all the exciting and interesting things that are going on in the world today. And so I'm delighted to welcome onto the show Phill Sacre. Is that Phil? Is that firstly? How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Sacre.
Oh, Sacre.
Yeah. It's everyone thinks it's Sacre. And it's quite an interesting whenever I pick up the phone, if someone said, "Oh, is that Mr. Sacre?" then I know it's not someone who knows us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
Well, I'm pleased that we've got that out of the way, and I apologise because that's the way we were all pronouncing it on last week's show. So we
no problem.
We know that now. So Phill Sacre, it's good to have you, Phil, on the show. It's a delight to have you on, and we are really looking forward to discussing your articles in a little bit. But firstly, why don't you for our listeners and viewers introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a small amount about your background and your current situation.
Sure. It's great to be here, and thanks for it's great that you thought my article was worth discussing, which is good. I feel like I sort of maybe hit on something there which is worthwhile. You were right about me last week. I am ordained in the Church of England.
Yes.
I was ordained priest, and I served my curacy here in Clacton, and then after that I just kind of stuck around. I've just got permission to officiate, which basically means that the bishop has given me a general waiver in this diocese to officiate at the permission of the incumbent. So I'm kind of here as an assistant minister, and I just spend about 2.5 days a week doing that, and then I spend the rest of the time. I've started up a sort of internet ministry called Understand the Bible, and that is kind of just teaching the Bible, teaching the Christian faith online. I trained at Oak Hill 2011 to 14. I've got a wife who's also called Phil, rather confusingly, Philippa, and I've got 2 girls, and I've been very delighted that my oldest girl, she's gone back to school this week, so I have been dancing around and actually I've been happy, but I haven't known what to do with myself. I'm not having homeschool here. I guess like you, I suppose over the last year I've just been scratching my head a lot, because I think when the first lockdown came in, for most of us probably we went along with it, and although for me I kind of thought, well, there's something a bit funny about this, but all right, if it's necessary, it's 3 weeks, and a year later I feel like I'm in a dream or in a nightmare, to be, it just feels like, the world has completely changed. And I almost feel like no one has really noticed, like everyone's gone mad and no one quite sees that.
It's very bizarre, isn't it? Phil, before we go any further, have you lived in Clacton for a long time? Are you from that area, or is it sort of new for the job?
I haven't lived here before 2014, but not long before that we lived in Colchester, which is just up the road. I mean, in our correspondence, I must have mentioned that I'm from Mersey Island. Did I mention that? I didn't. I think you mentioned Mersey Island. I can't remember whether you mentioned you were from Mersey Island, but
so that's where I grew up. I went to school in I went to school in Lexington and Ipswich, and I went to the sixth form college in Colchester. So that's my home, really. For everyone who's listening who's not heard of Mersey Island, it's a small island off the southeast coast in Essex, which is what's that? Sorry,
it's not always an island, is it? So I don't think calling it an island's a bit much, but go on.
I mean, this is petty beyond belief, Tom.
Well, there are times when you can't get to it because the road is closed because of the water, Isn't that right? Yeah.
Yeah, it has tide. The tide covers the road twice a day. It's an artificial road which connects the island to the mainland. It's just, Tom. Honestly, by your logic, Britain is not an island because it's connected to France by the Channel Tunnel. It doesn't make any sense what you're saying.
I don't think that's fair, actually, Jamie. I just like my islands to be, distinctly island, like like the Isle of Wight. You cannot get to it.
All right. So if you built a bridge from the mainland to the Isle of Wight, would that change the ontology of the Isle of Wight?
Well, no, because a bridge is different from a causeway. If you built a causeway, no one would build a causeway to the Isle of Wight. It would be madness.
This is just ridiculous. This is petty and absurd. I'm from Mersey Island, which is officially called Mersey Island because it is an island, and it's a very beautiful place actually. Some of my family still live there. Shout out to Mersey Island and Colchester and Clacton indeed. In fact, my brother has moved recently, I think, to Clacton. I'm not sure about that. He used to live in Harwich. I think he lives in Clacton now. I should probably pay closer attention to things like that. Well, brilliant. All right, well, Phil, we all completely resonate with what you're saying about the feeling at some points like you're living in some kind of dream or nightmare. And in the crazy dream world that we're living in at the moment, it'd probably be good to just catch up about some of the news that we've been subjected to this week. Tom, do you want to say anything about what's been going on? What's the new exciting stories that are out this week?
Are there any news stories anymore, Jamie? I think we're just sort of cycling back through the same again, aren't we? It's just sort of endless. I guess we have the exciting news on the royal front,
Yes.
which has been as our listeners will know, we're staunchly royalist show.
Indeed.
For once, I think we agree with Piers Morgan, which is an unusual position to be in.
Amazing.
And we're very sceptical of some of the claims that are being made. And certainly, they sound like mudslinging, don't they? Just throwing around accusations of racism. It sounds like taking the absolute the least sort of gracious line on anything that anyone's ever said to you. This isn't the behaviour of an adult; it's the behaviour of a child throwing toys out of a plan.
You're talking about Meghan, presumably, there, not Piers.
Yeah. Does Harry talk anymore? I don't know. No, that's unfair, isn't it? I think it's been an interesting week from that respect.
And it's interesting. Phil, I don't know whether you've been across this as well, but Piers Morgan has now left his role on Good Morning Britain, so that's just come through today. So, and this is because I've watched some of. Have either of you seen any of the clips? They're I don't want to make light of this, but they are actually very, very funny. And Piers Morgan he's put on quite a lot of weight, I must say, since the last time I saw him. He's
not been kind to him, is it? Which is
what's that? Sorry.
Lockdown hasn't been kind to him, which is slightly ironic.
Well, I remember him putting a picture of himself on Twitter with a picture of he's just got this huge takeaway, and this is a lockdown takeaway type thing. And I was thinking, it looks like he's been doing that quite a lot. Anyway, that's not really the point. The point is that he was absolutely. So I think what he was. Oh, sorry, my phone started ringing now. Okay, yeah. So I think that sorry, I just remember what I was saying. So I think what he was doing basically is what he's been doing for the last year, which is just shouting really, really loudly at people when he disagrees with them. But the fact is that with this particular issue, he is on dangerous ground. With the COVID stuff, he can say whatever he likes because he's a ringleader for all the lockdowns and everything. And I think he'd probably have quite a lot of sympathy in terms of defending the royal family for sure. But what I think perhaps has got him into trouble is questioning whether or not Meghan was actually having mental health problems. Because she was saying this stuff about that she's she was suffering with, I think, depression and things like that. And Piers Morgan was basically saying he just didn't believe her. He just thinks she's lying. Now, in many ways, I think that is a completely reasonable comment, given the context. But I think also that it's the kind of thing where if you say that publicly, then you're inviting obloquy upon yourself, because you're talking about somebody's kind of what they're saying, this has been my experience type thing, and he's basically saying, no, it hasn't been. And I think that is probably what's got him into trouble. But it is it's one of these things, isn't it, where you have this kind of these two competing I don't really know what's called them, but two competing kind of factions. What in this instance is the royal family, who are a respectable institution, and obviously people think they should be defended. But then on the other hand, you have this kind of this kind of woke racial justice issue, which is also being invoked as well. And it's like these two things have been pitted against each other in this situation. But what I would say, and I said this to you before the show, didn't I, Tom, is that I think that this is probably good news for the lockdown situation, because Piers Morgan has been such a huge ringleader for lockdowns, and I think that this could mean that the public conversation is ameliorated slightly, because we won't have his. I mean, I don't watch Good Morning Britain, obviously, but he's been banging on about this, like sowing fear into the millions of people who watch this show.
You know what, Jamie, it's very weird, and I've always been slightly bemused by his lockdown reaction, because Piers Morgan, of course, he wrote a book this year which came out, Wake Up, Why the World Has Gone Nuts. And the whole, I've not read it. It looks a little bit tabloidy, but it's got sort of just reading the Amazon sort of sort of back cover stuff. And you get things like here it is. Wake Up is Piers' rallying cry for a united future in which we reconsider what really matters in life. It's a plea for the return of true liberalism, where freedom of speech is king. And sort of things like that. It says, if like me, you're sick and tired of being told how to think, speak, eat, and behave, then this book is for you. It's a weird rallying call for freedom in the face of a sort of crushing orthodoxy from someone who's, in fact, spent a year crushing freedom in the name of orthodoxy. It's just you get the impression that if he'd actually got on the right side of this issue, then we might be in a very different place, because he was one of the people howling for a lockdown this time last year.
Yeah.
And once you accept, and as he does elsewhere, in some of the adverts, that freedom of speech is a bigger issue than COVID, and I think it is. Then you accept there are other intangible goods and rights that are bigger issues than our response to COVID. Like, for example, the freedom to not be told what to do by a totalitarianist government, who are sort of telling us exactly what we can and can't do in a way that would be absolutely ridiculous. I think that's very sad in a sense. He doesn't quite connect that. It's almost as if this book has been written in a world in which the government, followed its actual pandemic plan and relied on health information and support and education rather than coercion, law, and heavy-handed policing. It's very strange.
Yes,
he's a strange. I found this the last 12 months that Piers Morgan is quite an interesting guy, because he was pro Brexit, wasn't he? And he was quite vocally pro Brexit. So it's not because he doesn't want to stand up against the establishment, but it's just whatever's got into him. He has, like you say, he's calling for lockdowns. He was, being quite harsh on people who've questioned and so on. And you think, exactly like you say, Tom. On the one hand, I can. He sees what's going on, but on the other hand, he doesn't see what's going on with this particular issue.
Yeah,
how do you square that circle?
It's really bizarre, isn't it? I mean, I don't really I've got no idea really. And yeah, I mean, the few times I've watched clips of him on Good Morning Britain, it seems to me that I wrote an article about this actually recently on the North American Anglican Journal, but it seems to me that there's this kind of thing in our culture where, and this does in some ways, it might link to the thing with Harry and Meghan, but there's this thing in our culture where we're sort of making a virtue out of being cowardly and afraid and timid, and talking about how scared we are, and this is, I think this is kind of epitomized really through Piers Morgan's kind of ranting about the danger that this virus poses and how we need the government to protect us from it. There seems to be something kind of I don't really know how to describe it, but there seems to be something in our culture which is celebrating that sense of being afraid. And I wonder whether there's a link here with the whole thing about victimhood, because victimhood is such a powerful card to play now, and obviously this is what Meghan has done, and in some ways she sort of outmaneuvered Piers by doing this, and indeed anyone really who plans to challenge her in public, because she's done that, hasn't she? She's played the victim card, and she said it's not just that she's a victim of anyone, it's that she's a victim of the royal family, this institution which epitomizes the notion of the establishment. So I don't know, I wonder whether there's something there about victimhood, about being made to be afraid, and that sort of, in a funny way, putting you in a position of power. I don't know. That's just my thinking.
It is about concern for people, isn't it?
In
that, I suppose, an issue like Brexit, although I think that does come into it to an extent, that it's about the way that love has been redefined to be something. What's loving is when we avoid doing anything to harm someone else, rather than when we act for their good. And so you can, and I think this is why the church, so we're sort of getting into, but the church has gone so deep down the lockdown rabbit hole, is because it's an opportunity to show how loving we are. So and at our church is more, I feel more normal when you go into a supermarket. When I go into a supermarket than I do in going into church, because we're and at least we are meeting, which is good. I'm really glad about that. But so going back to Piers Morgan, I think you're right that there is an appeal, isn't there, to kind of, I'm a loving person, I'm a good person, I care, and so I'm going to put 2 masks on. I'm going to we try and outdo each other in trying to be the best person. And perhaps even for someone like Piers Morgan, that's quite an attractive thing to, if you believe all of the government propaganda, then we are basically facing Ebola. You can be, I think a normal person could be forgiven for thinking that we are facing an existential crisis as a society because of this virus, which is constantly the doom-laden scenarios and everything.
I think that's really interesting, Phil, what you say about the redefinition of love being essentially a kind of I don't know, I think that's something that's related to the a central idea of political liberalism, insofar as it's about freedom or I don't know, morality maybe is about is fundamentally about pursuing your own goals whilst not hurting other people. And so this could be seen as kind of the ultimate sort of manifestation of that impulse. And the problem with that, I would say, from a theological or even perhaps an anthropological perspective, is it's the problem with that whole movement in political liberalism and modernity is that it's trying to find some kind of basis for ethics without attributing an end or a goal or a telos for humanity. So we don't really know why we exist, or where we're going, or where we should end up. So we make that part up ourselves as individuals, and then we just have to not interfere with each other as we pursue that end, or those ends rather. And I think that's one of the mistakes that the church has made in this time. And of course it's made it because its engagement with the world is its engagement with lots of things is so superficial. And it perhaps presents us with an opportunity to think about what discipleship actually is. It's clearly not just about not harming other people. It's about, growing into the image of Christ, and helping each other to grow into the image of Christ. You can put it in, you could articulate it in different ways, but I think most Christians would agree with that, at least. And so, if that's what Christian discipleship is about, it's certainly not just about not infecting people with a virus, or even, it's not just about not hurting people. And in fact, sometimes the love that we show to people is it has an element of risk. I don't necessarily mean physical risk. I don't really mean physical risk at all, but I mean that we risk something when we help someone, when we give advice to someone, when we guide someone. There's always some kind of risk there, isn't it? But that you take the risk so that the person might move on and advance to a higher goal. We don't just leave one another alone as individuals and say, well, you just get on with it.
It's interesting, actually. Just going back to C.S. Lewis. I know I quoted C.S. Lewis before, but I think he saw this nearly 100 years ago.
Yeah.
He wrote an essay called, actually it was a sermon called "The Weight of Glory." Have you come across that?
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
But if you go back and look at that, he said, what's the biggest problem today? And he said that if you ask, men, what's the highest of virtues, they will reply unselfishness. And he said, if you'd asked people, in ages gone by, it would have been love.
Yeah.
So he said a negative has been replaced for a positive. And he said, as if our good rather than theirs was the point. Our going without rather than their good was the point.
Yeah.
And I think that was really insightful, that, we think that going without is, we're like the ascetics.
Yeah.
And society is very ascetic, actually, in a funny kind of way, while being very materialistic. It's a kind of weird mix of things.
Yeah.
But, it's like going without has got value. So wearing a mask, going without seeing people, is like we're earning our virtue.
Yes.
Instead of actually saying, no, God wants us to go and do.
Yes.
And love.
Yeah. Yeah. And in many ways, the whole phenomenon of virtue signaling, as it's called, and it's such a powerful phrase, is nothing new, is it? It's just the same thing that the Pharisees were doing, and the same thing that we're all tempted to do, which is to show off our righteousness to other people, and to make that the point of our behavior. And there's obviously lots of that going on.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it also requires this sort of framework the government has put around the management of this pandemic, because if the government had been able to demonstrate, for example, that this was a really deadly disease, then people wouldn't have gone out in the streets, or they wouldn't have gone to see their grands, or there wouldn't, in other words, there wouldn't be any need for the restrictions, because they people, if there was Ebola going around outside, I jolly well wouldn't go out there necessarily. Actually, I probably would if it was one of my parishioners suffering, then yes, I would. But I'd probably have to go and live in a hotel room for a few months and protect my family that way, that sort of thing. But it's not, is it? It's not like that. It's a respiratory disease on a par with serious flus in the past, which we've dealt with as a civilization without this sort of catastrophic kind of reaction before. And if masks have been demonstrated to be incredibly useful for combating the spread of this disease, again, people would have taken them up without any requirement. because it would be self-evidently the case that would be a thing to do to help other people. But instead, on thin evidence, they've been mandated because they might do something good. And the most the government will say is may, the word may. They may help. So there's no sort of killer evidence they do. And it's like that over and over again. They kind of they're coming down with by robbing us of our ability to actually make choices. It becomes less and less of a moral. The whole thing becomes less and less moral.
I've actually it's been fascinating looking at. I haven't written about this, but I've been thinking about the connection between legalism and what's going on with the way that people will pounce on anyone who isn't keeping the rules.
Yeah,
Pharisaic, isn't it? It's very sort of
exactly.
So you're right back to first century Judea, where it's kept being castigated by the Jewish leaders for healing on a Sabbath, or
yeah,
but they're not keeping the rules themselves necessarily. They're keeping the rules so long as it's convenient for them.
Well, there's a lot of this, yeah. And all of these polls that say, very much in favour, you wonder how much people are saying, I'm in favour of this, but I make my own risk assessments. And I suspect that happens rather a lot. But I know I've never seen, I'm seeing people standing around on street corners chatting, when they bump into each other. In theory, that's illegal. In theory, if you actually support them, you should, the moment you should turn your back on them and walk off, but you don't.
It would be such bizarre behavior, wouldn't it? And I think so. Yeah, I think there's definitely something there about the sort of Pharisaism, legalism thing. And one of the salient points that clearly comes from your two articles, Phil, and just for listeners, I will put all this stuff on the show notes, including Phil's website as well, Understand the Bible. But is this question of experts, and I think that this is another interesting aspect to this whole conversation, because you've got people who are enforcing the rules in this kind of legalistic way, but it's in the service of or rather in deference to the experts. And going on Twitter, I mean, obviously Twitter is not representative because you choose to follow people, but when I see lots and lots. So say Boris Johnson writes something, or Matt Hancock does, or something like that. I see lots and lots and lots of very, very skeptical things. People calling them idiots and saying they're destroying the country and so on. But I do see also lots of comments saying you just need to listen to the experts. You just need to trust the experts. Let's listen to the experts, shall we? Was one I read earlier. And it's interesting going back to the thing with Meghan. And one of the interviews I watched with Piers Morgan, and again, it's one of these things in our culture which just doesn't really seem to make sense. Our culture, because it's founded on a worldview which is false. The idea of secular humanism. It's not true. Obviously, we all here believe that the Christian worldview is true. So the worldview that our culture is founded on it contains various antinomies which don't mesh with each other. They contradict each other. And this is one I think I observed through this Meghan thing, because she kept on saying in this interview, and I have to say I didn't watch the interview, or at least I only watched a few clips of it, but she kept on saying, and this guy on Piers Morgan kept saying, this is my truth. She kept saying that over and over again. This is my truth, Oprah. This is my lived experience, was something that she was said as well. And this Piers Morgan was saying to this guy, who was clearly in favor of what Meghan was saying, he kept on saying, he was talking about this issue of Archie not being given the title of prince, right? And he was saying, this isn't an issue of Meghan's experience, of how she experienced the royal family. This is just the way that things are, regardless of the child's skin color. He wouldn't have been made a prince because great-grandchildren are not made princes. And Piers Morgan was saying this in his own sort of, obnoxious, shouty way. And this guy kept on saying, but this was her truth. This was her truth. Like that was more important than the actual objective reality. But it was interesting to me because I'd just been reading I think I'd just been reading your most recent article, Phil, to put that alongside this deference to experts, so and the other thing that happened yesterday as well was Chris Whitty coming out and saying all the models show there will be a third wave, or I'm not actually sure which wave it's supposed to be now. Is it a third wave or a fourth wave? Anyway, all the models show this. This is what he says. And so he comes out, it's all over Twitter, it's all over the news, etc. And so this man speaks with, absolute objective certainty about what's going to happen because he is an expert and he is a scientist and he knows. But when it comes to an issue like, a person's lived experience of racism, that the subjectivity of that experience overrides any objective criteria that might frame that experience.
I think though that, Jamie, you draw the good parallel there, because critical race theory could be likened to the modeling. And I think that so one of the things, and one of the reasons I wrote about experts is because in the academy, in the universities, and this is the David Goodhart somewheres and anywheres thing, but I think people have been to university, that there is a worldview which universities are preaching, whether people realize it or not. And critical race theory comes from the universities.
Yeah.
And it's not based on truth. It's based on truth as perceived by these academics.
Yes.
And you could say it's very much like the lockdown modeling. It's the truth as perceived by the lockdown modelers, by Neil Ferguson. So it's kind of, they construct these models of reality, and it's not actually reality. It doesn't have to even bear very much resemblance to reality.
Yeah.
And so when Meghan says all the royal family are racist, she's basically, it's not reality, it's her reality, because she's living in this dream world of critical race theory, where everyone's racist and everyone white is a white supremacist or something like that, which doesn't actually bear any relation to the truth, or much relation to the truth.
Yeah, we can bring this into the worldview of a lot of people who are sort of broadly sort of lockdown supporters, can't we really? Because they're in a very similar way. I support this, it's good. The bits where I don't do it don't count. My lived experience of this lockdown is that the lockdown is a good thing because it's protecting me. But I'm broadly in favour of it because I'm told that I need to be. But their actual in a sense, their actual behaviour is as if they don't agree with it. And it's a long. I mean, it's that sort of thing's been long reported by pollsters.
Yeah.
And I think there's a good case that it's going around.
Yeah.
And
it goes back to a little bit to our conversation about models last week as well, because we were talking about the way that models, generally speaking, are used to describe reality, sometimes to predict it to a limited extent. But as Daniel said, I don't know whether he said it on the podcast, but he said, and I don't really know the right sort of language to use, but he said once you get beyond sort of 2 or 3 variables, the amount of outcomes, multiplies exponentially, and there could be potentially billions of outcomes. So with a model, there's only so much you can actually use a model to predict anything, and mostly they're used for description. And what is potentially novel about this situation is that models are being used to not only predict and like we say, like Chris Whitty says, predict with a high degree of certainty. Not only are they being used to do that, but they're actually being used to manipulate or change reality as well. The model says this, and what we need to do is change the model, right? So it's not
to conform reality to the model.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like critical race theory as well.
Yeah,
everyone's a racist, so we have to act as if that's true, even and do unconscious bias training and all that stuff, even if it's not actually true. Yes,
and ultimately, I think that there's a very subjective, if I might put it like that, or maybe an idealist epistemology where we don't accept reality as it actually is. We don't look at reality honestly and accept it as it is, but we've come to the place where we think that we are the arbiters of reality, and certain people have a higher degree of authority to tell us what reality actually is. And I mean, like everything else, I think ultimately this is a theological problem, because when I suppose it's probably as simple as to say that when you don't believe in God, everyone is potentially their own God. Everyone can create their own reality, and I think that probably is something of what's going on here. But I don't know. I guess the overall sense we have in this culture is confusion, and I think that this is mirrored in all of these discussions. But Phil, why don't we talk a little bit more in depth about your article? So the first one we spoke about last week, I think you were arguing basically that you thought that this lockdown debacle would be the end of experts, because they would be shown up for what they are. And I suppose what we said is that we all feel, and don't get me wrong, Phil, I would like hope, and people write emails to our account, many emails looking for hope. They want hope, and they're fighting against the encroaching sense of darkness and despair that seems to hang over everything these days. So I'm not opposed to hope, but we were saying that I suppose one of the most salient things we were saying is that it seems hard to see how this whole narrative is going to break down, because there is a sense in which it does need to break down for people if they're going to turn against the experts, because there's a kind of there's a sense in which the narrative has an integrity. I suppose if you accept the premises of the whole thing, right? That there's a massive pandemic. We're all going to die, or lots of people are going to die. We need to take these measures in order to stop it from happening, lockdowns and masks and so on. And these work, and we'll do that until we get the vaccine. And this is a narrative that has come about over time, because this was not what they told us in the first place.
And we get the vaccine because we're not sure the vaccine's going to work, as Whitty said. So you can sort of, it becomes self-fulfilling, doesn't it? You end up with, but as we've said about a number of times since this latest lockdown, logic is that at the same time we have a vaccine which should bring us out of it, but then Chris Whitty popped up and says, well, actually, there's going to be a surge in cases and deaths even with the vaccine when we come out of this, so therefore we need to go very slow. And then Hancock pops up and says, well, if you don't behave yourselves, we're going to have to go even slower. And then other scientists pop up and says, well, we actually need some of this to be keeping on going, because otherwise, we're going to end up with a wave next year. And then some other fascist, sorry to use the word, but it is almost true, isn't it, turns up and says, well, actually, we need to keep elements of this in a new normal. Don't expect to be mixing freely with people until 2024 or whatever. Yes, that's a sort of a narrative that's self-fulfilling, because it relies on the sort of tautology, doesn't it? It relies on lockdowns work. It's the only thing that's saving us. Therefore, without lockdowns, we're not going to be able to get out.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a split there, isn't it, between people who are emphasizing the lockdown, and the need for a continuing lockdown, and then other people who are saying that the vaccine is going to significantly ameliorate the problem. And to be fair to Chris Whitty, and that's not something I'm necessarily inclined to be, I think he said that the vaccine would work for most people, but that the virus would spread amongst and do damage to the unvaccinated and people for whom the vaccine didn't work. I guess he didn't specify how large that group of people was, but they.
Well, actually, we can work it. I've been doing a few sums. Effectively, that I don't know if you remember the 55,000 deaths that he's been telling the Prime Minister that they get if they unlocked too quickly, and they don't really go away. It's if you take out everyone under 30 and you take everyone out over 60, and you take the rest of the population and assume that 2 in 1,000 will die from COVID, which is probably too high, then you end up with about 55,000 deaths.
Yeah,
that's what they've done basically. Which makes a load of assumptions about how vulnerable that age group is. It makes a load of assumptions about the danger to them, but also the sort of the level of herd immunity that natural infections provide. Because when a disease spreads naturally, the level, the reproduction rate drops quicker than than a model, as they all do, which assumes that everyone is equally susceptible. Because not everyone is equally susceptible. A bus driver, for example, is probably more susceptible than a stay-at-home granny, for example. And so therefore, the bus driver's got it and has passed it on. They're most likely to get it, and they're most likely to pass it on. Once those people have gone, the actual herd immunity arrives a lot quicker when done naturally. That's not the case with vaccinations, of course. Anyway, the point is that the assumptions they make are that sort of about 2 in 1,000 of those between sort of say 30 and 60 will die, which but then you actually look at the actual death rates, and it's not that much higher than natural death rates anyway. The background sort of risk, and that's part of the issue, really, isn't it? As the assumption says, pandemic deaths, illnesses from pandemics are part of the background risks of living. They're not something that we can remove.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that, Tom. I guess what I was trying to sort of drive at is that if I get myself into the mindset of somebody who really buys into all of this stuff, there's a kind of coherence to it. And I don't know, but I sort of think probably the majority of people are like that, I would have thought. I mean, I think there are lots of people who are skeptical, who are probably, with the analogy with Brexit, they're quiet because they know that they'll be ridiculed, or they think at least they'll be ridiculed and ostracized as a result of being more open about what they think. But I guess my question to you, Phil, is, and maybe you'd want to revive some of the themes from your articles, is what makes you think that narrative might break down, or that there's a high degree of likelihood that it will break down?
I think there's a few things. So the first thing is that there's going to be an incentive for that narrative to break down.
Yeah. So
I was reading an article the other day about 6 million people who are going to have delayed treatment, or who are going to be waiting, or, so most of us by now, we might have known someone who's died of COVID, or, someone, but everyone is going to have mental health issues, know people with mental health issues, antidepressants, people lost jobs, that there is, not one person is going to be unaffected by lockdown. And that's going to be the case for years to come.
Yeah.
So we are going to be looking at the effect every day of lockdown for years.
Yeah.
And it's just how we've been changed as a society as well. I think we are going to be confronted with that. And I think it won't, like you mentioned the Iraq war last week. And I think that's one difference. Whereas the Iraq war happened, I remember the protests for the Iraq war. I didn't go on the protest, but I was against it at the time. And I remember there were lots of people who were, but it happened over in Iraq, and it was something that was on the news for a while, and then it just kind of, and I think that's something that has, because it's out of sight, out of mind, that expression.
Yeah.
This is something that's going to be in our faces.
Yes.
And I think it will be in people's interests to kind of to question.
Yes.
Because I think the government are going to try and portray themselves as the saviors. Oh, we developed the vaccine, we saved us. But then, you think about Rishi Sunak's budget, and, when taxes rise, when people aren't getting the health, when there is problems with the NHS, when people can't get cancer treatment, when people can't get, all of these things, then people are going to say, well, hold on a minute. Why did that happen? Oh, that was because of the lockdown.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first reason.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, are you coming?
No, well, I was just going to say, I think it's so important, and I sort of share your hope in that. I can see where you're coming from, but part of the issue is the media is very invested at the moment. There would be a lot of egg on a lot of faces in order to pull out and go the other way. And I kind of agree that there might be some of these things come through, but then you get people saying, oh well, economic collapse would have happened anyway. It's not a product of the lockdown, it's a product of COVID, which is pretty nonsensical, because those countries that didn't lock down as hard as us have done better in terms of economics, in terms of, there's a strong correlation between, but anyway, people are saying that already. And then other people will sort of step up and say that without, basically the narrative has been seized by a whole sort of group of those sort of the same group, maybe that's shared by the sort of woke narrative, that's shared by sort of the soft left. I'm not going to call them liberal anymore, but once upon a time they might have identified as that. And it's going to be really hard to undo it, because they're just going to say things like, well, if we hadn't done it, we would have, we'd have still had the economic fallout, we'd have still have all the problems, we wouldn't be any better off. I don't know. That's what sort of I fear.
I think that, I think you're right. That there is a lot of investment, and I think part of I think that investment is going to be part of their downfall. Mm-hmm. And bear in mind that I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet. This is my intuition. This is, based. But if I may go on to Brexit, because I think these issues are related.
Yeah.
Brexit, we've got the same set of people in Brexit who were who anti-Brexit. Sorry, we've got the establishment were pretty much vigorously anti-Brexit. We had 4 years worth of the establishment trying to overturn a democratic result. That was the rejoin movement. People would say, oh, we want a second referendum. They just tried to overturn that decision, and it happened for 4 years, and yet Brexit happened, and it was the victory, I think, of the especially I think the working class, who I think are the forgotten people in society. They're the working class seem to me at the moment to be the ones who get the poor end of the deal of this expert-led society. And I think I would say Brexit is a small glimmer of hope that that the working class are not silent, and there are so many who've said to me, like, I got into a conversation with an electrician before Christmas, and he was saying, well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they see what's going on. The people are the broadsheets and politicians, they're always saying, the little people were led astray by a bus, by the slogan on the side of a bus about Brexit. But no, in my experience, the working class have got more of an idea of what's going on in society than the technocrats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to something you said earlier, is that it's a lot of it's to do with going to university, because it's when you go to university, that's where you get brainwashed. And you really do. And it's not just about what happens in your lectures, it's about what happens culturally as well, with other students and the milieu of the university environment. And you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that university often does is it educates people out of their common sense. And I've had a very similar conversation with my window cleaner a couple of months ago, where I was just doing something with my son. We were using an outdoor stove, and we were burning some wood on it, and we just got talking. And so I just asked him, and I've done this a few times with people, just a normal working bloke. I was like, what do you think about all this this COVID stuff? Do you think it's as bad as they say? And are you and your family worried about it? Well, no, not really. No, I didn't stop. I stopped maybe for a couple of weeks in the first lockdown with my business, but then I just carried on because it didn't seem to me to be too much of a problem, and nobody I know has it. And it seems to me that these politicians are just interested in power and in bossing people around and telling people what to do. And it's just that kind of, that straightforward, straight talking, clear thinking, common sense, which the middle class seem to have utterly abandoned. And it's like they can't think for themselves. It's like they just watch. I mean, honestly, I'm not going to say who it is, but I know somebody who is a high level intellectual. Like you'd probably know who this person was if I told you who it was, but a very, very high level intellectual, extremely intelligent, top of his field in terms of the academy and things like this. And if you follow this person on Twitter, it's like he just retweets the BBC and the Guardian, and this is reality. And there's something about this where you think this is how you live in a delusional state. Just watch the BBC and read the Guardian, and trust that more than you trust the evidence of your own eyes and your own experience in life.
But the experience of life of the middle class, and this is part of the reason I think why the church has been sucked down this rabbit hole, and part of the reason that, and it's a sort of corollary of another problem with the church, which is just being chronically middle class. The experience of the middle class is of a lockdown, of staying at home and not doing work, or being furloughed, or staying at home and working from home. The experience of the working classes has been quite the opposite. They've been carrying on pretty much as normal. In fact, it's been pointed out that actually, if the Great Barrington Declaration sort of called for focused protection of the vulnerable, what lockdowns actually do is focus protection of the middle class. It puts all the risk onto the working class, which isn't very good, because they tend to be less healthy. But it's also not good because we don't see that actually, to a lot of people, life has continued. Not normal, because the pleasures they had in life have gone. They're going to the pub, the football, whatever they like to do. That's a horrendous sort of oversimplification, I think.
Well, it sounds good to me, Tom. I'd like to do those things.
But actually, their work has continued. They've gone into people's houses. They've gone into work. They've been manufacturing. And you quite often, if you go past the sort of dry cleaners or something like that, you see them sort of chatting together, maskless, and why shouldn't they? It's absolutely right.
Yeah.
They spend all their time together to each other, but at all, even if the mask did anything. But the point is that the middle class haven't seen this. They've been sat at home getting other people to bring them stuff.
I think this is one of the massive problems that we've got in society. We've got this somewheres and anywheres divide. I mean, if you pardon me using that language, but I think it's a good one. And there are other ways of dividing it. Can you
elaborate as to what you mean by that, Phil? Somewheres.
So this is from David Goodhart's book, The Road to Somewhere.
Yeah.
So a somewhere is someone who's usually working class, will come under the somewheres, but someone who's got an identity in a place. Yeah. So the traditional community people. So here in a place like Clacton, much more of a traditional community than London or one of the big cities, big towns. Yeah. Anywheres are people who you could put them anywhere in the world, virtually in any city, and they would feel at home. They've got the same values. They're sort of secular humanist. They are, degree educated, and they usually have white collar jobs. That sort of thing. And I think society, as David Goodhart says, society for about 30 odd years has largely been tracking the concerns of the anywheres over against the somewheres. Because
the anywheres have a voice that the somewheres don't. Because, I mean, in effect, the somewheres might have some strong opinions about how things affect their local sort of town, their local community. But outside of that, they're not, I suspect, overly worried or interested in making a ruckus, as long as it doesn't affect.
And also, if what's happened is a lot of the qualification now to be an MP, to work at the BBC, you have to have a degree. And as we've just said, having a degree kind of puts you in the anywhere. It's like they railroad you down that worldview. Yeah. And so you'll become globalist, you become technocratic, just kind of because that's the air that you breathe in those circles. So I feel like, what's happened with lockdowns and with Brexit and with a lot of other issues is that we've had this kind of top-down technocratic anywhere class telling everyone else what the world should be like. Yeah. Immigration, for example, we think everyone is the same. We think that we should have open borders because it doesn't really matter if you take hundreds of thousands of people from a Muslim background and put them in the northern former mining towns, that will be absolutely fine because everyone's the same and they can just get along with no plan for integration.
Yes.
And of course, that doesn't work in reality. And that's what we've been seeing. I think there is a growing backlash in society against this technocratic approach. Yeah. And I think the reason I think people have been so pro-lockdown is because they're terrified into it. And I think people will do anything and say anything when they're terrified.
Yeah.
It's been people who are not scared of death. Christians, as we've talked about, there's problems there, but I think what's going to happen, I hope, over the coming months is that the threat of lockdowns of the virus will fade, and what will happen is we'll go into a period then when we will suffer some massive effects of the lockdowns, economically, people's jobs being lost, crippling mental health problems. That will come out, and that will become forefront in people's minds. At the moment, COVID is in, because control by fear only works for so long.
Yeah.
The fear will fade. The government will not be able to maintain this level of fear for so long. And people start thinking, hold on. And particularly, I think, like we said, amongst the Brexit voting classes, I don't want to oversimplify, but say that for the sake of argument, they are going to say, hold on a second, we've been sold we've been played for fools.
Yes.
And I think there's going to be a political backlash.
Yeah.
And I do see rising political movements like Lawrence Fox and others who are beginning to stand against the lockdowns. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Lawrence Fox and the London mayor elections.
I can only hope, because I think he's quite a genuine chap. It's a shame that, Nigel Farage, he's not by any means a sort of knight in shining armor, but it's a big shame. He sort of dabbled his toes into the anti-lockdown and came before Christmas, and then sort of came out again, which was a bit of a shame, because it would be really good to have sort of some serious political heavyweights, and he is, for all his fault, for those these days.
Tom, just to come in with that, I think it is probably a good thing actually that Farage is gone, particularly if somebody like Lawrence Fox is going to come through, because Fox is not associated with anything else apart from what he's been doing, over the past year or so. Whereas Farage has got a lot of baggage, and it may be true that for many people who would vote for him anyway, they would see him as a heroic character. And I certainly would, generally speaking, I'm in favour of him. But with someone like Lawrence Fox, he's very fresh, and his I've just on the his website now, where he's talking about his mayoral bid, and his message is very clear, and I'd love it. I'd love to see this message take off. I want to reclaim your freedom to work when you want to work and how you want to work. I want to remove all the obstacles that stand in between you and rebuilding after these lockdowns. I want to reclaim your freedom to move, to be where you want to be, with who you want to be with, the fundamental human need to be together. Nobody should say their last goodbyes to anybody on an iPad ever again. That's a very powerful line, isn't it? I want to reclaim your freedom to speak, to be yourself, to be part of the broader conversation, to cherish your history rather than rewrite it, to teach our children to be confident, not ashamed of who they are or where they've come from. Really, this is really good stuff, I have to say. This is really well written. It's to the point. I do think it probably is going to appeal to people if it can get that kind of traction. And Lawrence Fox could be a new Farage type character.
I think it'll be one to watch. I think that will be a good barometer, actually, if seeing what happens with Lawrence Fox, even if he doesn't win, but if he gets a good share of the vote, that will be a good barometer for what people are feeling. And I think there'll be more. I think it's having a growing. Is also sort of quite anti-woke. Which I think is, as we were talking about, the link between wokeness and the technocrats. It's a similar story. So that's positive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, for people on the outside, it just feels like they're all in it together, basically, doesn't it? I mean, that's how I feel. I feel like the whole establishment is allied in a series of interrelated causes, which benefit the establishment, but they don't benefit people outside of it. So I think what you said earlier about immigration, I think that's directly analogous to the situation with the lockdown, because there are two things there. You know, with immigration, people who are pro-immigration think it's an altruistic thing to do, right? To be, oh well, we don't want to have any borders because we want to be nice, we want to be loving and nice, and we want to give to people, and yeah, basically it will make our society better, or at least it will not harm our society, right? Whereas working class people and people who are, as you were saying, people who are associated with somewhere are concerned about their environment, and they would see this country as their home. And when you have a home, you want to have some kind of say about who comes into your home and what they do when they're in there, right?
You have to be about something as a country.
Yeah,
and it's like what Douglas Murray has this thing about, social integration and coherency.
Yeah,
and that's the thing, isn't it? That the technocrats and the largely the anyways, they have a view of what they want society to be, which is not really based. It's based on an ideal that, I mean, they're trying to create, in a sense, the New Jerusalem, aren't they? By thinking about what they think it should be like, rather than basically saying it's actually through Christ. It's unity only comes when we through that means, rather than actually trying to just put people together of all sorts of different religions and just expecting them to get on without any
all different religions or different cultures or different political assumptions. And that's what I was coming to, is that the technocrats and the globalists, they say, well, this is great, and we should do this and it won't harm anything and it's the good thing to do. But for the people who are actually in the communities, they're saying, well, no, we don't want this, or at least we want to be consulted about this, because this is going to fundamentally alter the nature of our way of life, right? So you can't just impose this stuff on us and tell us that it's the good thing to do when it costs you nothing to do that, and it costs us so much in terms of our community and our culture and our safety and so on. So it's that, and that's what I think is directly analogous to the lockdown, because it's all the middle class, it's all the globalists, it's all, what someone said to me, just as an example of this, when I was railing against this, when I used to be more engaged on Facebook than I am now. I hardly ever go on anymore. But somebody said to me, well, I can still go out for walks with my family, and I can still play tennis with my children. So I find it hard to be outraged about any of this. And that to me completely epitomizes. So because you can play tennis, you don't give a toss about other people who are losing their jobs, or who are being denied cancer treatment, or who are being forced to go out into what presumably
10th floor council flat.
Yeah, exactly. You're in a 10th floor council flat with 4 kids or something. You're in there months on end, and you're not allowed to leave, or you'll be arrested. Or the working class who are being sent out to work in what you presumably believe is a kind of plague-infested environment. You're fine because you can play tennis. All right, well, good for you. And it's that kind of thing, which I think is directly analogous to the immigration thing, and I think probably lots of other issues as well, because it's like, well, it costs you very little to sit at home and work on your computer and live in a big house and have this nice existence, and you don't have to go out and see your in-laws and do your other social obligations. But that's not how it is for the majority of people. You actually don't care about them. And this is why I find the left, at least in its kind of overt political manifestation, this is why I find the left so unconvincing, because I look at it and I think, you don't care. You don't care about the poor. You don't care about the working class. You don't care about the marginal.
And yet they claim that they do. Yeah. And that's the real irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the virtue signaling.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was thinking about this last night, actually, that the lockdowns have been an absolute godsend for people, for the virtue signalers, because it gives them the opportunity to look like they're being caring without actually having to do much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same with the modern left, I think, is that, you don't, in the past, just think about, Live Aid, raising money for charity and so on. Now you don't have to bother with any of that. Just say government should raise taxes and give more. Well, actually, not about raising taxes. The government should pay for more people's stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not wishing to kind of raise a debate about what level of state aid is appropriate or not. But that's what it is now, isn't it? It's about the government should sort it.
Yeah, it's about centralizing absolutely everything. And it's distinct as well from the way the left has been traditionally before the rise of the modern left, as you say, when the traditional left was very much about a sense of place, and it was very much about rootedness in a particular type of working class culture, like, the culture in the mining towns in the north, for example. That kind of political outlook had integrity. It was something that was morally, it was morally virtuous. I mean, it's not to say that necessarily agree with all of it, but there was an actual sort of humanly identifiable element to it. Whereas this new kind of modern leftism, which is completely kind of epitomized in the contemporary Labour Party, it's got absolutely nothing to do with the working class whatsoever. It's just got nothing to do with it, and that's why they got so hammered in the last election, because they're so out of touch.
This is one of the things which I've been saying. I'm sort of going back to my article, which is I think that there is no one now in politics or in the media who stands up for the working class.
Yeah.
And when I say no one, there are a few isolated voices, but the ones who claim to stand up for workers, the Labour Party, they're not. They're bought into this woke identity politics stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think there is a single voice really advocating for traditional working class people.
Yeah.
And this is why I think it's got to change.
Yeah.
And I think there will be change, because I think the working class know that.
Yeah.
And the lockdowns will have proved that.
Yeah. There's at least a niche for somebody to come in to fill. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about Farage, is that now he's sort of unambiguously out. Somebody else can come in, and maybe it might be Lawrence Fox. I mean, all the signs are good.
Can you hear me at all? You can. Good. I think I went through it.
Oh.
Yeah, you're back. Don't worry.
I was just going to say, I'm always shocked. Well, I'm not that shocked. I'm also, you've got this huge contradiction at the heart of the modern left, which is where they'll sit there and they will say we should never, for example, have closed the pits. They're still married to that as a sort of idealistic kind of past kind of battle. They should never have closed the pits. They should never have closed down the sort of working class economy in the north. At the same time, they will campaign against factories and in sort of Malaysia or Thailand or Taiwan, where because the working conditions are so poor, but at the same time they will use equipment bought from those factories. So they would never, in order to sustain the sort of profitable coal mining or sort of steel works or anything, we'd have to drop our standards of working in this country down to them, or force them somehow through tariffs or embargoes or whatever to bring their standards up. But there's a real problem with the technocratic, centralized sort of health and safetyist state which they support, because it cannot support the sort of idealistic past that they claim they want to preserve and return to. It's very strange. I can never quite get it. So they're opposition to fracking. I mean, what do they think happened when people blew up chunks of coal in the ground?
To be honest, Tom, I don't think they're even aware of this past anymore. I mean,
they claim it anyway. They make claims. There's a romanticism to this.
Well, there's a romanticism which you see in films like Brassed Off and things like that. But is Keir Starmer watching Brassed Off on a Friday night with his missus? I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
I guess you could say it's like the truth as they want it to be.
Yeah.
So, and that's what one of the things I've noticed is that it doesn't have to be consistent.
Yeah.
You can believe it, like transgender is another completely good example of this, that saying on the one hand sex is malleable, and on the other hand it's absolutely homosexuality, you cannot change it.
Yeah.
Absolutely must not ever dare considered the possibility that someone could change their sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And it's what was that? But this is the thing, you know, you can believe mutually contradictory things, and you just shout at anyone, and it's about power.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Ironically, for, you know, given what postmodernism was saying, but it is all about power.
Yeah, that's what Douglas Murray talks about, that, doesn't he? And he talks about the difference between hardware and software, and how you decide. You know, it seems pretty arbitrary to decide one is hardware and one is software, and not only just to decide that, but to treat people who would question it as criminals, basically. I mean, literally in some cases as criminals.
Yeah.
And of course, you've got the other absolute contradiction between a feminist point of view, which wants to celebrate the integrity of being a woman, you know, biologically and psychologically, and in other ways as well, the distinctiveness of being a woman, which would include, I suppose, being a mother as well. But then you have the transgender lobby who are saying, I think it was Penny Mordaunt said this week, which, you know, you hear people say all the time now, that transgender women are women. You know, like there's no difference between a biological woman and a man who feels that he's a woman.
It's truth by slogan.
Yeah,
by definition.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are transgender women, or at least there's at least one who fights in the UFC and weighs more than all the other women, and has much broader shoulders, and beats them to a pulp every week because she's biologically male. You know, and it's just a fact. And, you know, just on the issue of sports, I mean, if this keeps on going in this direction, there will be no women's sport, because
he's already done that, hasn't he? He's signed a presidential executive order that's forced certain athletics bodies to allow gender people to compete, which is, you know, there's no way. I think there's literally a huge gulf in performance between slower end of male athletics and even the top end of female athletics in some of them. Obviously, the difference depends on a lot of things, but the more physical things, like road cycling, for example, there's no doubt that a sort of mediocre male athlete, professional athlete, would come right at the top of the pack of female athletes, and that's just biology. So, you know, it's just not fair on biological women. That's the whole point of having separate competitions for the sexes, is to make it fair. Otherwise, you just have everything in one, as my wife says. You may as well just put everyone in the same league and just see how it pans out.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a big football fan, and there's a huge concerted effort to push women's football. And you know, I'm not against it. I've never watched women's football, so I don't know what it's like. I'm not against women's football, but they really want to push this and bring this onto a par with a man's game, which is really hard, because the Premier League is the most popular sports league in the world of any sport, as far as I think that's right. Anyway, certainly in Europe. So to get the women's game, which is very, very small by comparison, to get it even remotely in the same stratosphere, they have to put a whole lot of effort into this. You know, huge publicity, huge marketing. But, you know, if you allow men to start playing in the women's game, or, you know, transgender women to start playing in the women's game, what's that going to do to that game? It's just going to make it. It's just going to fundamentally change the nature of it, and the best players will be all transgender women. So
it's a good example of conforming reality to fit what you want to be the case.
Yeah.
You know, your idea of reality must control actual reality. So we think men and women's football should be absolutely equal. Therefore, we will promote women's football until that, because the only reason they can't be equal is because people are bigoted, right? You know, so therefore we will promote women's football until and then, you know, but then it competes with the transgender thing, and it's no consistency.
Yeah, and also the other thing there is that you always jump to the conclusion that it's because of bigotry, right? It couldn't be because men's football has been around for 170 years and women's football has been around for about 10 years. So, you know, it couldn't be something like that, for example. It's always the assumption that the right answer is that people are bigoted or that people are prejudiced, but actually reality is a lot more complicated than that. Listen, chaps, I think that we've had a good conversation there. I think we should draw it to a close, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to read an email of the week, because I'd like to read some feedback, but there's so much I can't really read very much of it. So I'm going to read this it's not an article, this email from a friend of the show, Matthew, who comes from, this word is Pietermaritzburg, South Africa. So I found this quite interesting. So he talks about how encouraging he's found the podcast. So he's speaking from South African perspective. He says there are so many problems with government's responses to this pandemic, many of which we've all addressed. As a medical doctor, it has personally saddened me how the generic narrative has used appeals to the authority of science and medicine to support a political program whose main effects seem to be an illegitimate increase in state power and financial benefit to pharmaceutical companies. Much of what is happening seems antithetical to the traditional understanding of medical ethics and the doctor-patient relationship. The principles of respect for the autonomy of individual patients and informing people honestly about harms and benefits to allow for genuine informed consent for medical interventions seem to have been replaced by the idea that it is acceptable and even desirable to engage in deliberate coercion and manipulation of large groups of people in the attempt to achieve poorly defined, constantly changing, and in my opinion, utopian public health goals. You are right to criticize what's going on. It's so disappointing that many people seem intimidated by expertise to the extent that they are unable to appreciate the gaping flaws in the prevailing approach. It's not as if history has not shown numerous examples of misguided government actions due to groupthink, discredited mainstream scientific theories, flawed mass ideologies, and the power of propaganda. Here in South Africa, we have had our own particular pandemic experience. In a country facing massive economic inequality and poverty, substantially related to huge societal distortions caused by our own decades-long government program of racist social engineering, we should have learned our lessons. Our government embarked on an economic lockdown combined with minimal support for employees or businesses, unsurprisingly resulting in even more unemployment. Our pandemic unemployment rate was one of the highest in the world, and also economic misery. We have also had mandatory mask wearing in public and a nighttime curfew for most of the last year, which is still ongoing. As you mentioned, our infection rates have risen and fallen, largely following other countries, seemingly independent of government tightening and loosening restrictions, and in the complete absence of any mass vaccination programs. Our rates are currently low, but of course our experts warn of a coming third wave, but seemingly can't decide if it will inevitably arrive in April or in June, and then he signs off. So thank you for that, Matthew. I mean, it's pretty shocking, really, isn't it, to hear that?
I think South Africa was actually one of the countries that you pointed out in your article, isn't it, Phil?
Yeah, I think they've had. I just put three countries: the UK, Sweden, for obvious reasons, and South Africa as just three. I think South Africa has had a different set of restrictions to us. Is basically why I put that. Although, of course, they've suffered as well under the pandemic.
And I think your point really stands up strongly, that there's no particularly good correlation on a country level between different restrictions and the shape of Jamie, I mean, I just every day I look at these charts. I don't anymore every day, but I used to, and I just cannot see why people cannot understand that the narrative is wrong, because you just have to look at somewhere like Sweden or Finland, or let's use other, Belarus, Florida versus California, the two Dakotas in America, and it's obvious that different that what we have here is a very hard lockdown is not necessary to contain this disease. It's not that's a lie, and yet you get my favourite hypocrite of the week is Grant Shapps, who in January said that he would that once all the over 70s had been vaccinated, he'd go on the barricades to get our freedoms back, and he had this fantastic interview on Talk Radio where he's rode back from that as fast as anything. And as Julia says, the goalposts always move, don't they? They're going to keep moving forever. Do you understand why lots of people don't trust the government anymore? To which he replied, "I want you to have your civil liberties back, but I don't want you to have them back in a way that kills other people." And that's the problem. Our risk and reward sort of has been reset as a society, and that's my biggest fear about Phil's sort of optimism, is that actually it's going to take a while for that to move back again, because as a society it's been destroyed. You know, we sort of stand in this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that seems to be a good note to finish on. Yeah, Phil, do you want to sort of say anything, any last words before we finish up?
I tell you, there was one quote which I saw on Twitter, and this was a few years ago about Brexit, and said, "Will Brexit happen?" And this person said, "Yes." He said, "I believe in God and I believe in the working class." And I thought that's a good quote to finish with. Just that, yeah. I believe in God. I believe in the working class, and I believe that the truth will come out.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and let's hope and pray that it does. We should flag up the debate that's happening in the House of Commons on Monday, the 15th of March at 4:30, which is about the vaccine passports. Again, I'll put this on the show notes so people can sign the petition and tune in and watch that debate. What's that, Tom?
Write to your MP. It's very important.
Please write to your MP and pray. And if you're interested, watch that, or at least there'll be a transcript afterwards. So that's a very important thing to be aware of. And if you'd like to email us on the show, do send an email to irreverendpod@gmail.com, and follow us on Twitter at irreverendpod, and also rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get the show. Also, another thing which I want to just flag up, because I frequently get emails about people having difficulties with churches, which is completely understandable, but do use the website uklockdownchurches.wordpress.com. There's a list of almost 200 open churches on that website, so you can at least look on there, and certainly if you're near a big town or a city, there's a good chance that there'll be an open church near you. And people who list their churches on that website tend to be people who are probably a little bit more welcoming and less kind of fanatical about the rules as well. So www.uklockdownchurches.wordpress.com. And again, I'll put that in the show notes as I do every week. So great. Well, chaps, thank you so much for being here. Phil, it's been great to have you on, and I hope you'll come back at some point and appraise us once again. But thank you for coming on, Phil.
And thanks for having me. And I'm just, really glad to be here, and really enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, well, we did as well, and it's great to hear your perspective. And Tom, I'll be looking forward to, I'm not sure when you're going to be having your haircut, but I'll be looking forward to seeing you in full John Cleese mode soon.
12th of April, Jamie, I think.
It's not for a while. Okay, all right. Well, I don't want to tantalize our viewers too much before that happens. Great.
5 of these left.
5 of these left before you get to see Tom. It's kind of like, it's kind of something to look forward to in the Easter season. Apart from the resurrection of Jesus, you can also look forward to seeing Tom with just his moustache, which I'm very much looking forward to. But it's great. It's been great to talk to you, chaps, and to all our listeners, God bless. Whether you're a Christian or not, we love having people listen in and write to us and get in touch. And if the show is interesting or in any way beneficial to you, then we're really pleased about that. And we look forward to being with you once again next week. So thanks a lot, everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.